In this video, we are going to talk about line plots, frequency tables, and histograms. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a line plot. A line plot is a way of representing data where there is a labeled number line with a scale and an X in place where a data point above a data point each time it occurs. So, line plots, sometimes it could also be called a dot plot. And a dot plot, instead of a little X, you'll just have little dots. Same idea. So when I have a line plot, I want to label this number line with the numbers that are on in my list here. So I want to kind of figure out which one's the minimum. So it looks like my minimum is 68. And looks like my maximum is 75. So I'm going to label my line plot from 68 to 75. And then to illustrate my data, I'm going to put an X above the number every time that number occurs. So I have 168. I have 169. I have 2 70s. I have a 71. I have 3 72s. No 73s. 3 74s. And 2 75s. So a line plot is just one way we could display data in a table, and it can help us find the median. It can also help us find the mode. And so our modes in this case are, remember, our mode is the most, or the one that shows up the most often. So when it occurs most frequently, that would be 72 and 74. So a frequency table is similar to a line plot, except for that we're looking at the number of times something occurs within a certain interval. So a frequency is the number of data values in a given interval. And a frequency table groups a set of data into intervals and shows the frequency at each interval. So here's an example. Here's a list of data for the number of home runs hit by batters in a local home run derby. So what they did was they chose the intervals 2 to 5, 6 to 9, 10 to 13, 14 to 17, and they showed the frequency, or the number of times the number of home runs occurred within that interval. So that's what a frequency table is. It chooses intervals, and then you show how many times something happens within that interval. So if we're going to make our own frequency table, this is for the number of runs scored per game by a local baseball team in a 15-game stretch. So I'm going to make my interval. I'm going to make a little table. And I'm going to call this side runs. I'm going to run out of room. Runs scored. So runs scored and then frequency. So let's look. It looks like I have 0 as my minimum. And 9 is my maximum. So let's do 0 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and then 9 to 11. Now I don't want to just say 9 plus. I always want to have like a really specific interval, even though I know that my maximum is 9. So let's figure out the frequency. So how many are between 0, and 2. So I have 1, 2, 2, 0, 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are between 0 and 2. And then 3 and 5. So I'm going to circle all the ones now that are between 3 and 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then 6 to 8 would be 3. And then 1 would be 9 to 11. So it just shows the frequency or the amount of time something occurs within a certain interval. So we use a frequency table to then create a histogram. So we're going to skip example 3 and we're going to go straight down to histograms. So a histogram is a graph that can display data from a frequency table. So it's basically taking that frequency table and putting it into a graph. So if you see our example below, I have watching television hours frequency, and then we just took that data that was in the table and we turned it into a graph. And this type of graph is called a histogram. So let's work on making one ourselves. So we scroll on to example 4. I am going to make a frequency table. So then I can turn this frequency table into a histogram over here on the right. So this is the prices per yard of various types of mulch. So I'm going to have, so this is prices and frequency. So looks like my lowest price is $4 and my highest price is $12. So I'm going to do kind of a similar interval. I'm going to do 2 apart. So $4 to $6, $7 to $9, $10 to $12. And you can really have as many intervals as you want. If you see our graph, it really has like 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces on the x-axis. But I could have also divided that up to make more. But I'm going to have 3 intervals because that seems to make sense for my situation. So how many are between 4 and 6? Well, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's see. How many are between 7 and 9? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then 2 are between 10 and 12. All right, so we're going to make my histogram now. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like my max is 7. So I can't count by 1, so I'm going to count by 2s. I'm going to label my axes counting by 2s. And then I'm going to label my y-axis that I just labeled counting by 2s. That's my frequency. And then my x-axis is my prices. And our intervals that we chose were 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12. So my prices for 4 to 6 was 7. So I'm going to draw my line the best I can right between 6 and 8. My price for 7 to 9 was at 5. And my price for 10 to 12 was 2. And so that is how we turn our frequency table into a histogram. We could also give this a title. So all good graphs typically have a title. So let's add a title as well. Frequency per price of, we're talking about garden mulch. So I have a title and I have labels on both my axes, which is what makes for a really good graph. All right, I would like you guys to try example 5, make a frequency table, and then turn it into a histogram. Now we got some really big numbers here, so remember, you don't have to start at 0. Your first interval can just start at your minimum value. So think about what the best interval would be. It could be 10 apart, 50 apart, so keep that in mind, and answers can vary. So try example 5, and when you're done, play, and let's compare what I did compared to what you did. All right, so this is what my frequency table and histogram look like. This was definitely a tough one to try to figure out an interval, so that way I could have 4 intervals. Now, if you chose more than 4 intervals and you divided up your graph differently, that's totally fine. But this is what mine looked like. So the last thing we need to talk about is the different types of distribution when it comes to graphs. So there's 3 basically different kinds of distribution. So we call a graph uniform when all the bars of the graph are roughly the same height. We call a graph symmetric if a vertical line could divide the histogram into 2 parts that are basically mirror images of each other. And then a graph is skew if the histogram has a peak that is not in the center. So, for example, this first graph would be considered uniform because all the bars are relatively the same height. Our second one would be symmetric because if I drew a vertical line right about here, the 2 halves are roughly equal. And then our last one, this would be an example of skew, where our peak is not really in the center. It's off to either the right side or the left side. So what I'd like you to do is finish 6, 7, as well as this last question on the last page about Jim Shorts and is a star basketball player. When you've completed these questions, go ahead and play the video to check your answers. All right, let's look at questions 6 and 7. 6 and 7 ask you to describe the shape and explain how you know. So I would say that in 6, it's uniform, and it's because all of the bars are roughly the same height. In 7, I would say it's symmetrical because if I drew a vertical line, each side is pretty much a mirror image of each other. Then moving on to the last page, it talks about Jim Short is a star basketball player for the Arlington Heights high school basketball team, or Arlington High School basketball team. The number of points Jim scored in his last 20 games are as follows. So they actually gave us a frequency table and they told us what the intervals were going to be. Now this middle column I left blank. You could have used it. It says tally. That's just a place to help you tally up how many are in each interval and then count your tallies and put it in the frequency column. So if you want to use that, great. If you don't have to. And then it asks us some questions about this frequency table. So it says, which interval contains the greatest frequency? Well, that would be 20 to 29. Then it says, in what % of the 20 games did Jim score 30 or more points? So 30 or more would come from the last 2 parts of the frequency table, 4 and 3. And how we find a % is we do part divided by whole times 100. So 7 out of 20 games, he scored 30 or more points. Multiply that by 100 and we get 35%. Now it's saying which part of the graph does the median lie? Well, the median would be in the middle of the data. And you see the middle of the data would be between 20 and 29. Now, in which interval does the upper quartile lie? Well, the upper quartile would lie in this 30 to 39 range because that's the middle between the median and the max. So then our lower quartile would have fallen between 10 and 19. So now it asks us to construct a frequency table. So I took the intervals, to construct a histogram for the frequency table. So I took the intervals that they gave me and I labeled my x-axis with those. And I actually need to finish labeling this. So my x-axis should be labeled with let's see, points scored, right? Yeah, points scored. So I'm going to label this with points scored. And then my y-axis is going to be my frequency. And I'm going to put my title kind of off to the side because I ran out of room. So points scored in gyms 20 games. Okay, so I drew my frequency table. Then part G says, would you describe your graph as uniform, symmetrical, or skew? I would say this graph is symmetrical because the highest point is in the middle and the left and the right are pretty close to mirror images of each other, not really different enough to be skew.